13 Days of Halloween. A remote hotel, the most unusual guests, a tour guide that can't be trusted. And the newest arrival is you.
Why are you here again?
They sound like someone you trust.
I know you can hear me.
Starring Keegan-Michael Key as the caretaker.
Please make yourself at home. After all, this is it.
One story each night, starting October 19th and ending on Halloween. From iHeartRadio and Blumhouse Television, listen to Aaron Mahnke's 13 Days of Halloween on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
After you listen to today's podcast, here's one to add to your playlist. I'm Christian O'Connell, and I've had this thought for a while. What if you took the world's funniest and most interesting people...
Hello, I'm Ricky Gervais.
Celeste Barber. Some people call me Beyonce.
I'm Russell Brand.
...and asked them to share the stories behind their 3 most treasured items?
No doubt about it, the guitar. I think I know the same chords now as I did when I was 14.
From iHeartRadio, this is The Stuff of Legends. Add it to your playlist for free. Just search for Stuff of Legends in your podcast app.
I'm reminded this week of an old commercial that ran on TV in the early 1990s for some sort of facial cleanser. There's a crowded high school cafeteria full of teenagers shouting loudly during lunchtime. The camera pans to one lunch table where a group of girls is discussing their facial cleansing routines and the anxieties associated with teenage acne. And one young girl at the table says, "Well, my dad's a dermatologist, and he says..." And before she can even finish her sentence, complete silence falls over the whole cafeteria. Hundreds of students sit hushed and rapt in attention to listen. And the spokesperson voiceover says, "When a dermatologist talks, everyone listens." And I can't exactly remember what product they were selling back then in 1992, but I promise you, I begged my mom to get me some. I'm Clay Aiken. It's Wednesday, October 28th. And no, Politicon isn't hawking facial cleanser this week. But with less than a week to go until the biggest election day in modern American history, we find ourselves feeling about election experts the same way as those high schoolers did about dermatologists. So this week, for our final episode before the 2020 election, when a polling expert talks, we listen. And few folks know more about political polls than the folks at 538. Clare Malone is senior political writer for one of the most trusted of political prognosticators, FiveThirtyEight.com. She joins us this week, and we will bask together in her expertise. Clare Malone, thank you so much for joining us. You can't possibly, you're not old enough. You don't remember that ad, do you?
Well, I don't know how old you think I am, but I think that might be a Stridex commercial.
Is that what it was? See, I was thinking it might be Noxzema, and I didn't want to be wrong.
Either one of those. I mean, Noxzema had the kind of like girls by the swimming pool thing. I don't know. I remember Stridex wipes coming like that feels like the right thing.
But I have all week long, I've known you were going to be coming on, and all I can think is there anyone in the world more in demand right now than you guys at 538? I just have to imagine you constantly have to be talking. Is everyone in your life constantly asking you, what's going to happen? Please tell me what's going to happen. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I feel like I've trained my sort of family and friends and loved ones to. People don't ask me that many questions anymore. I think they realized that when I talk to family, I just want to talk about anything else besides politics. But yes, how could people not be, tuned in and interested in what's happening? So I definitely end up getting a lot of questions by email about like, oh, what should I make of this Pennsylvania poll? And I always text or write back, average the polls. So
don't talk to me. Here's our website link. I'll tell you, I'm not going to lie. It is a shortcut on my home screen. The 538 polling page is a shortcut, and I probably check it 5 to 10 times a day.
That's
and
good. The clicks
I'm helping your clicks, right?
Exactly.
I'm giving you so many. But I feel like I saw something on the website the other day that even said, nothing has changed in the last 5 minutes since you checked before. It's got to be, why is it because people were so surprised in 2016 that you think that folks are so tuned into what you guys specifically are doing over at 538? Is that they're looking for some sort of certainty? Why are we so interested in polls when they kind of didn't hold up 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in 2016, I think we always had this dedicated contingent of people like Clay Aiken who were refreshing 538 every few minutes. And then, yes, obviously Trump won, and that surprised everyone. And I think what's been really interesting about watching 2020 is watching people grapple with kind of what the data is telling them. And by the way, I think Americans in general are more tuned into polls and data, in part because of Trump's loss. I think it made people realize that, when we at 538 talk about Trump, Biden has an 88 out of 100 chance of winning the election. That means that he's got those 12 other chances, those 12 other universes in which he wins. So Trump winning made people grasp that, 1 in 10 chance much better, I think. And I think it's made people have this interesting reaction where they see the data this year. And the data has actually been pretty stable for Biden the whole way along. I mean, I still have to say, caveat, Trump could certainly still win, but it's a bit more of a stable race than it was in 2016 in some ways. There are fewer undecided voters. But also in the media, I think people who cover politics and who talk about politics, on cable or who write in newspapers, those people also have these emotional and professional hangovers from 2016 where they want to be extra careful. And so I do think you see a lot more couching about who might win the election. And I actually think that's good, but there's certainly a lot of nervous energy in general in America right now around the election. Nervous energy is perhaps a kind way of putting it. There's, because I do think there's a lot of bad energy, to use sort of like a woo-woo new age term here. But yeah, I certainly think a lot of people are having those 2016 flashbacks right now.
So if you can help us just break down exactly what obviously I'm not going to ask you to give us 538's proprietary model and formula, but when people look at a polling average, they're not necessarily specifically looking at 5 different results added together and divided by 5. Are they? Certain polls have more weight with 538 or with Real Clear Politics or some of these polling averagers. How do you determine which polls are good and which ones are not as good? What goes into that?
Yeah, and hold on, let me turn off that email that just dinged. Yeah, it's a great question. And let me just, for your listeners who aren't familiar with 538, I can just kind of walk them through things. Please. So for starters, we're kind of known for this thing called the presidential model, which I'll get to in a second. But let's start off with, there are lots of different pollsters in the world, and not all of them are great at their jobs. So what we try to do is we try to give ratings, A to F, for every single pollster out there. And we have a pollster rating page that you can go to. But usually you can pretty reliably count on the polls done by all the TV networks. That includes Fox, ABC News, NBC, CNN, and the major newspapers. So the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post tend to have really good A-rated pollsters. So we've got different polls that are, some are good, some are bad. Then you have polling averages, which is what we do and somewhere like Real Clear Politics does, which is they actually do just take all the polls and they average them together. And that's your polling average. We don't do anything extra special to it. And then you have the presidential forecast model or the Senate forecast model, which is the proprietary Nate's brain plus the brains of lots of other smart people at 538, where they throw together, yes, the polling averages, taking into account, that some of the pollsters are better than others. They take into account economic factors, historical, all the elections and the way that elections have behaved in the past. If I'm being honest, Clay, I don't even know all the things that go into the presidential model. But that spits out that probability that people talk about so much.
But when I look at, say, Quinnipiac versus Monmouth, and the two of them have a poll, each of them have polled, say, Pennsylvania, and they get somewhat different results. Does each pollster actually, when they are determining their likely voter model, are they determining their likely voter model based on who they think is going to show up? Or is it based specifically on who told them they would show up?
It is likely voters. That's generally what people do. And it's different. I mean, you've just named two pretty good pollsters. And the people who run those polls might have different theories of how to weight things in order to get the most accurate outcome. So
that's what happened. That's what went wrong in 2016, right? That some of these pollsters may not have weighted for education as much as they should have, or may not have taken into account that less educated white voters would be turning out. Yes. And they were surprised by that. So is that something that that Monmouth sat down and said, okay, we're gonna make sure we have twice as many high school educated white voters in our model, and Quinnipiac said we're going to make sure we have 3 times as many. I mean, do you understand what I'm asking? I'm asking,
absolutely.
Are they deciding what this likely voter audience is?
They're deciding. Yes, they're deciding how to weight those voters. So you brought up education, and that's exactly right. So they'll call 10 people, and 2 of them will be white people without a college education. And based on that pollster's view of the electorate and how to be accurate, they'll say, okay, well, we'll weight this person's response a little bit more in the final result. So we'll give emphasis to their education so that so that they might lean more Trump and we get a more accurate picture. But yes, like what you've just laid out is exactly it, is that those pollsters have a general, very educated idea about how people's demographic group and political.
But we don't know how they're doing that. They keep that stuff proprietary for themselves. They keep it secret, or do all these pollsters say, "Oh, this is how much we're weighting Black voters this year"?
You can go to a pollster's methodology and see, like, was this a live voter poll, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think they publish generally like that super detailed thing. Although I think that we actually did, a couple of my colleagues at 538 did a survey of pollsters and kind of asked them, what are you doing differently in 2020 than you did in 2016? So people can take a look at that because it's certainly something that a lot of people who do polling for a living were really thinking about, is that they wanted to give people a more accurate read on what the electorate's doing during a kind of changing time period for different demographic groups.
Do you feel, and do your colleagues feel, that most of these pollsters have accounted for these problems in 2016? Or is there, what do you think? I mean, I know you're looking at the numbers with far more education than I am, and a lot of people are, but do you think that they have done it well enough? Have they fixed the problems of 2016?
Should we trust the polls?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to ask it in a different way than the other 20 people who've asked you.
No, but I appreciate it. I think that we should trust the polls. I think, we should trust that people are making good faith efforts to not miss the people that they missed in 2016, or to not miss the political dynamics that they missed in 2016. But I think people should also remember that it's, polling is hard and imperfect, and there's lots of things about the polling industry that's changing, in part because everyone uses cell phones now. You might not be likely to pick up a random number that's calling your cell phone, or your phone might be programmed actually to send those people to voicemail. We're trying to make internet polling better and have it be more representative. So I think the answer is yes, but also be aware that, pollsters release their margins of error with these polls too, right? So while Trump won and it was a surprise last time, his win was actually within, the polling margin of error, right? So I think that's also important, is that people need to realize that they give those margins of error for a reason. And so just to kind of, And
in 538's credit, I think you were the only outlet that was saying, in the days leading up to 2016, we're talking about a polling error difference in Michigan and Wisconsin. So I remember walking through Central Park in the days before the election on 2016, hearing Nate Silver say it could just be a polling error, and thinking, oh shit.
Yeah.
So and I was not as shocked as a lot of people were.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, it's funny. I I'm kind of going back and reading some 2016 coverage and frankly, like emails I wrote in 2016 around this time, trying to get my head back in that place. But, on October 31st, I think Nate wrote an article that basically said, hey, there's about a 10% chance that Trump wins the Electoral College, but loses the popular vote. And obviously that's a scenario that happened. So I think that's a good example for your listeners of, it was a 10% chance of that happening, and that happened, So that's sort of a perfect example of these probabilities and uncertainties that we're all trying to wrap our brains around.
I think Frank Luntz, I don't remember where I heard him say it, but in the past few days said that if pollsters make the same errors this year that they did in 2016, or make similar errors, or their final polls turn out to be off as much as they were in 2016, that it'll be the end of polling. Do you think that no one will trust polls anymore? Do you think that's true? Do you think there's a higher risk right now for getting things right?
Well, I think Frank Luntz runs focus groups and maybe has a vested interest in people trusting focus groups more than polls. No, I mean, listen, I think that if pollsters, once again find that they had gaps in their knowledge, that they'll make good faith efforts to fix them, and maybe the media will continue to get smarter about how. Well,
we do have a very short attention span as Americans, so we always say, "I'm never going to trust the polls again. I'll never watch American Idol again if Clay Aiken loses." And lo and behold, damn it, they did anyway.
Do you watch?
No, God, I don't. But I was just kidding. I was just kidding. Nobody ever fall. I'm moving to Canada if Trump wins. But you know what? Your ass is still here. You're voting again. Are there states that have not been talked about in this recently as much in the past few weeks or months that you are specifically thinking folks should pay attention to more?
I think probably your listeners kind of know the Florida and the Michigan and the Wisconsin kind of interesting states to watch. I'm kind of interested in Minnesota and Ohio and to see which way those states go. States that I think maybe I didn't expect to be as on the margin as they are.
So Minnesota, that would suggest then that a state that you see it as a remote possibility, even that a state that went to Hillary Clinton might actually switch to Trump.
Yeah, and so yes, so there's lots of interesting stuff going on in the polls. I'm actually trying to pull up here what is Minnesota right now?
Hold on, I got my shortcut now, girl. I can find it. You want to pull up Minnesota?
So it's I think Minnesota went in 2016. I think it's the other way around, right? That in 2016 it was Trump.
Minnesota went to Hillary just barely in 2016.
Just barely. So yeah, sorry. Okay, but Biden is up by 8 right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully, if you're a Biden supporter, you're hoping that it should stay in that. I mean, if you look at places like Montana, where Trump won by 40 points in 2016, but currently, I think the most recent polls out of Montana have shown Trump leading by your model right now has Trump ahead by 6.7% in Montana. So in these states, one has to assume that in these states where Trump had huge leads in 2016, and he's now winning for sure, but not winning by nearly as much. I think in West Virginia, he won by 40 points, and now he's leading by something like 18. That it doesn't bode very well for Trump to be able to pick up any states if he's shrinking his margins, even in the most red of states. Is that wrong?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think even the idea that Texas, which is usually just a guaranteed trove of votes for Republican candidates, in the way that California is a big trove of electoral votes for Democrats typically. The fact that Texas is kind of Trump is being made to compete in a state like that, that's pretty significant because a lot of what the end stages of these campaigns are about are kind of almost one campaign making the other campaign waste their money and energy in kind of defending their home turf. So I think the fact that Trump kind of has to do that speaks to the fact that he's kind of back on his heels a little bit this time around.
Should folks take from turnout? I'm in North Carolina now, and I believe that as of today or yesterday, something like 85% of the 85% of the number that voted in all of 2016, early vote, mail-in vote, day of voting, 85% of that number has already voted. So most folks, am I wrong in believing most folks are expecting that turnout this particular year will be higher than anyone can remember? Is that right?
Yes, correct. It's going to be a pretty high turnout election. I think...
Who's that help?
Well, potentially it means that we're going to see maybe more young voters, which I think would tend to help Democrats if we're kind of, stereotyping the broad swath of young people. But again, I would also caution people, it's also, it's a...
Don't worry, we're not going to take anything you say to the bank right now, girl. You're free to talk. Say what you want to say.
I think what is notable is that there are, in 2016, there were a lot of undecided voters, and there aren't that many undecided voters right now. So I think we've seen over the past 4 years. And
I did say to somebody the other night when I watched after the debate, they had those undecided voters, and I said every damn one of those has decided they just wanted to be on TV, because I don't know that I believe that anyone is sitting there going, I really can't decide between. I mean, you're talking about apples and oranges, right? So if you're a Trump voter, that's you, that's fine, but it's not like you're kind of thinking about it, and not sure yet, right?
Well, although you might have these, let's stereotype it, the kind of like the white guy in Michigan who didn't go to college, or did go to college and doesn't really like Trump. It's been a lifelong Republican, and he voted for Trump in 2016, but COVID's really kind of thrown him over the edge here. I mean, we should note here that older people, particularly older white people, really voted for Trump in 2016, and he has suffered massive losses of that elderly vote or support among elderly people. So, I do think there are some people who are kind of on the margins with Trump.
Aren't there some polls that sort of take that into account? What is the one? Can you explain the one that USC, University of Southern California, does? Don't they have one block of permanent voters who they have consistently polled to see if their opinions have changed?
Yeah, this is a tracking poll. Yeah.
How do tracking polls work? Help us out.
Sure. A tracking poll means that they get one group of people and they stick with the same group of people for a year, and they ask them essentially the same questions over and over again. And they kind of, it's almost like, taking their temperature over the course of a year, however long it goes. And, they want to have a certain number of Trump supporters and a certain number of, now Biden supporters, and they want to see how those people feel at any given time, so that you can kind of track the movement of demographic groups as big events happen. So, one big event that we look at in recent polling history is when Trump announced that he had COVID back in early October, right. And we did see in some of those polling averages, and I don't actually know, what this particular tracking poll found, but you did see a dip in support for Trump right after his COVID diagnosis and the first debate happened. And then it was down for a little bit, and then it kind of ticked back up to sort of that median. But those sorts of things help us get a sense for where did the averages and where did the opinions of these different groups shift, and what news event or thing that happened.
So they've got to be very careful to make sure they're not finding people who are dyed in the wool. I mean, they have to choose their pot of people pretty carefully to make sure they're not such party or candidate loyalists that they're never going to change their mind, right?
Well, I think they probably have some people who are probably pretty pretty partisan. But I think that there was a famous example in 2016 of one of these tracking polls where there was only 2 or 3 black voters, and one of the black voters dropped out or something, or changed their opinion. And so it sort of wildly threw off the metrics for that entire demographic group. So, I think, if it's not done entirely correctly, it can, or if there's an interesting fluke that happens,
So
the numbers
let me
can
ask you a
skew.
question that you probably asked 100,000 times also, but bear with us because I really wonder, why the hell do we even do national polling? What's the point? Is there a benefit to someone like you who is looking at these polls and trying to glean information from them? Is there a reason that national polling matters at all? Or is it just, as the uneducated me, believes, a waste of energy because we don't elect presidents that way?
Damn, Clay, this is like existential questions with
But
Clay Aiken.
I mean, I wonder we don't.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
I mean, we got,
Yeah.
that's why people were so shocked because when Hillary lost, because she definitely was winning the national vote. But every day when I hit my refresh button for my 538 poll page, there are still so many national polls. And I think, why do I? But so there has to be an answer. Why? You must care somehow. Somebody must care, right?
Yes, we certainly care. And I think what you're getting at, and what probably a lot of people at 538 would say, is like, we wish that there were more resources devoted to high quality state polls, because those do give us a very clear picture. Again, because we have the electoral, I think that the short answer for why we have national and state polls is because we have both the popular vote and the electoral college, right? Which is like, there are some states that matter more in the sense of, under the system that we have, candidates cater to those voters more than other voters, and therefore people want to have really good snapshots of what's going on in those states at any particular point in time. It would be great if we existed in like a media business world where newspapers were able to poll all 50 states in a high quality way. We don't have that world. But I will also say that there is a utility, and there's probably a greater emphasis put on this because we have mostly national media organizations now covering these elections, not high quality state operations, unfortunately, because of media consolidation, which is another story. But these national organizations place an emphasis on the national polls because there is a sense that we should know what all of America is thinking overall, because we do have this debate going on about like, the popular vote versus the electoral college. Should we know the overall feelings of Americans
That just makes Democrats frustrated. I mean, it just frustrates them when they see that their candidate's ahead, but it all boils down to Florida or Pennsylvania or somewhere else. So, I mean, it's just going to take a state like Alaska completely surprising the crap out of somebody one year, and nobody polled up there, so no one realized that it was turning blue all of a sudden.
Yeah. Maybe Alaska should take that into account and sort of make a play for
pull
relevance.
it on us right now. I mean, we spoke with Jessica Taylor from Cook Political Report a few weeks ago, and she said that was a state that she was watching. Maybe not on the presidential level. No, not on the presidential level. She was talking about the Senate race specifically. But, that's a state that tends to be ignored by a lot of folks. But apparently they have a Senate race this year that folks may end up being surprised by.
Yeah.
Folks are to that end. Why do you think that states like South Carolina are polling in the way they are, where you've got a state that is almost inevitably going to vote for Trump at the presidential level, but is the polling, at least right now, shows a razor thin race between Jamie Harrison and Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
What does that say to you? Why all of a sudden did this incredibly conservative state perhaps decide to vote for a Democrat at the Senate? Really? Maybe what?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And probably in some ways you would have better insights to this as a Carolinian, obviously not a South Carolinian, but
yes, we are very different.
But I mean, I think some of it is, so Jamie Harrison, who's running against Lindsey Graham, is a Black candidate who I would call a moderate pragmatist in the mold of like a Stacey Abrams in Georgia, where he's not, Jamie Harrison isn't running to be like your super lefty guy. He's saying like, I've been in South Carolina politics for years and years and years. I'm a rational choice. Lindsey Graham has like made a whole switcheroo with Trump. I don't know if you should, trust that guy. He's almost offering himself as like obviously he's not Biden, right? But he's saying, hey, you white college-educated suburban voters who live in the Charleston area, right? A pretty wealthy, it's still a southern city, but it still has probably some of the voting characteristics that lean blue that a lot of just cities across America have. But also, I think Jamie Harrison there's some benefit to having a big turnout election, particularly in South Carolina, which has a huge pool of Black voters who are, by and large, Democratic voters and might want to come out and support Jamie Harrison. So I think that's a case of having a pretty good candidate in this race and making it a lot closer than it probably should have been under just blank political conditions.
By the way, a little bit to that end, the Black vote has, at least on a high profile level, 50 Cent, Ice Cube. Mm-hmm. Trump has gotten some Kanye West, even though I guess he's running himself. Trump has gotten some pretty marquee name endorsements from Black males. Is there a shift or any movement from Black males towards Trump, or are polls showing that?
I think there is I didn't prepare myself for this. I do believe that there is a slight movement among Black men. We should say, by and large, Black men support Joe Biden. But I think what's key here and what you're pointing out is there's a gender gap in general for how people view Trump. 2016 had the biggest gender gap in the history of American elections, which basically means men. Yeah, I think it was something like a 20-point difference between men and women. Women voted for Clinton. We're going to beat
that this year.
but I think that extends to, beyond just white men. It goes to, the Hispanic men or Black men, might have a more favorable view of Donald Trump, because I think Trump does voice some, to use the trite internet word, I think a lot of Americans don't love PC culture.
Right.
Yeah. And so they like someone who kind of pokes at that. It's why people like Joe Rogan, right? There's a certain desire for bursting the bubble of artifice, like going past things that you just like Donald Trump's style. And
this is also something that's polled on too, right? I mean, people, Democrats and Republicans alike, can see data somewhere. Maybe we're not paying attention to it now because we're looking at these horse races, but everyone can see data that shows how many people appreciate or how people feel about PC culture or identity politics. It's not as if though that people aren't aware of that. Are Democrats choosing to just not worry about that right now?
I think that they don't have to. I think there was a ton of talk during the Democratic primary about identity politics and whether or not they wanted to turn the Democratic Party into that. I would say if you polled people on the phrase identity politics or PC culture, Democrats and Republicans would say, I don't like that, right? It has a negative sheen on it. And so Democratic primary voters said, well, we chose the white male older candidate for our candidate this time around because we didn't want to be stereotyped as the identity politics party. Now, I'd say that this summer with the racial unrest and the protests in America about police violence against people of color would prove that identity politics isn't like an annoying internet thing. It's a thing that a lot of Americans actually care deeply about. But it's a lot of it's about how people and parties package it. And frankly, I think, the fact that on the Democratic side of things, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley are women of color who are sort of seen as the face of that quote unquote identity politics movement. There's probably a little bit of misogyny and racism tied up in that, where people say we've got more important things to worry about, which is, a bit dismissive of pretty decent slice of the American population, right, and the way they're sort of trying to make their way in the world. And that goes into a whole bigger question of, the really rapidly shifting demographics of America and how the white experience in America will not be the predominant one in about 20 years. So
I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh, host of the podcast Mating Matters. I believe nearly every human behavior is motivated by a desire for love, sex, or to hedge your reproductive odds.
I think women have this ability to plant these mental bombs into a man's mind.
But the thing about humor is that the value of humor, it goes up.
We're wired to reproduce.
To them, it was a super female. It was a giant female. And they were lured into trying to mate with it.
The science of love is fascinating.
It's a bizarre form of biohacking, really.
If you have the 7R+ gene, you are more likely to be involved in an affair, yes.
That's where some of the research gets really intriguing.
There's so many ways to be a human.
But I must say, sex between three people can get complicated.
In a nutshell, the Kinsey scale looked at two things: sexual fantasies and actual sexual behavior. Listen to Mating Matters on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
On September 17th, 2009, 24-year-old Mitrice Richardson disappeared without a trace in the woods near Malibu, California. She had been arrested at a beachside restaurant for failing to pay a tab and taken to the Lost Hills Sheriff Station.
She's not from that area, and I would hate to wake up to a morning report, girl lost somewhere with her head chopped off.
The police released her just after midnight, with no car, no cell phone, no money.
She doesn't know the area. She's never been in your area. Well, I think she's depressed. That's what has me more
that's worried you more than just her? Okay.
Mitrice disappeared into the darkness and was never seen alive again. I'm Catherine Townsend, host of the podcast Hell and Gone. We're going to try to find out what really happened to Mitrice Richardson. School of Humans and iHeartRadio present Hell and Gone Season 3. Listen to Hell and Gone on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Speaking of places where demographics, or especially where Democrats have expected and wanted demographics to change for a while, Texas. I'm just looking at my shortcut here. Siena College, New York Times upshot is an example of this not being true. But outside of them, any pollster you have rated higher than C right now from the last week, Quinnipiac has Biden at 47, Trump at 47 in Texas. Morning Consult has Biden at 48, Trump at 47 in Texas. University of Texas at Tyler has Biden at 48, Trump at 45. Data for Progress, which I think is
it's liberal, yeah.
Liberal poll, yeah. So we'll leave that out. But the others, University of Texas at Tyler, Morning Consult, Quinnipiac, these are not biased necessarily polls. They're showing. Come on now, Claire. Really, Texas now? Really? Is it just a pipe dream? Is it the type of thing that Democrats are going to get really close at and not be able to bring home? Or is Texas actually really a state that might flip on the presidential level this year?
It could, and if it doesn't flip this year, I think it's certainly entering a phase where we'll be talking about Texas a lot more for the next couple of decades as more of a purple state. Kind of in the way that people used to talk about Ohio or North Carolina as more purple. I guess North Carolina still could be
still purple. It's still pretty purple.
It's still purple.
Well, but I will say to that, to where you're headed with Texas, I've asked people in the past few weeks, and so I'll ask you the same thing. Do you really think that in states like North Carolina that voted for Obama in 2008, then voted for Romney in 2012, Trump in 2016, I think is going to go for Biden this time, but I just got to vote once, unfortunately. And Texas, that might or might. Do we really think these states are trending towards Democrat candidates, or do we think that this year might have to be pulled out of the average, like the Russian judges score, because this is just a very different year? I'm not 100% convinced that North Carolina has shifted to the left for the long term so much as it might be that Trump is such a unique candidate that places like North Carolina, places like Texas, places like Georgia just might not be willing to put up with this particular Republican, but might go back to them in the future. What do you think is the case?
I think the way to think about this is there has been for people who are super into politics, there has been a, red and blue, you guys all know the map I'm talking about, map in your heads that for the past couple of decades has kind of had similar states being the most important, or the swing states, And I think what's going to start happening, and perhaps 2020 will be the first election, is we're going to see a lot of new states pop onto that purple or swing state map. So we're going to have potentially places like Texas and Arizona and Georgia start to move into more of the purpley zone that, maybe a North Carolina or an Ohio kind of state.
And that's not unheard of. I mean, if you remember that Stradex commercial, you remember that Noxzema commercial, you remember that it used to be Missouri that was was like the bellwether. Right. Missouri used to be the state that you never knew which way it was going to go. And nobody's betting any money on Missouri this year.
Exactly. I mean, I think, Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to win a bunch of these states in the
Georgia,
South,
right.
Tennessee, like
Arkansas.
Al Gore didn't even win Tennessee,
right.
which is maybe even a whole Al Gore problem.
South Dakota, North Dakota, that was Tom Daschle land and Byron Dorgan land in the 90s. And the Northeast, the Northeast
exactly.
was Republican too. So are the parties switching bases in these states completely?
Well, it's an interesting question. Let me go back to your North Carolina point, right, where you were saying, okay, it voted for Obama in 2008, but then voted Republican for the next two elections, like wither North Carolina, right? I think a lot of that depends on, and a lot of this map depends on the direction of the GOP, right? Like, Reagan did great things for the Republican Party, if you're talking about just an electoral vote kind of thing. And Trump could potentially be doing terrible things to the Republican Party if you're thinking about an electoral vote kind of thing, because you might turn off all those, Romney voters in North Carolina if you nominate like I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good Trump-esque candidate in 2024. Like, let's say
Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, or even who would be a more interesting example of this is like Tom Cotton. Who has the like Ivy League pedigree, but is very conservative, has adopted Trumpism, I would say pretty wholeheartedly, but he has more of a polite sheen to it,
You call it polite sheen. I call it personality of a walleye salmon. So I don't know if he's necessarily the person that you want to nominate.
But what if the Republicans, instead of the Tom Cotton, Matt Gaetz kind of super conservative, more Trumpian strain of things, what if they nominated Nikki Haley, right? Like,
right. But so much of it's not about policy anyway, right? I mean, Trump doesn't necessarily align himself with conservative policies. It's about who people trust. I mean, Ben Sasse is incredibly conservative, but he is a little bit more approachable and relatable than a Tom Cotton might be.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
those people tend to do well in states like North Carolina and perhaps even South Carolina, because, it's not necessarily about Lindsey Graham's policy positions there so much as it's about this, can we trust him, or will he become a new person after Trump is gone? Concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that the Trump era has revealed about politics, and frankly, particularly the politics of the Republican Party, is, if you look at the Republican Party platform in 2016, some of the policy positions were completely flipped from the 2012 Romney Republican Party platform. And the crisis the GOP is facing is that there are true conservative ideologues in the GOP that believe in small government and certain fiscal conservatism, but they are realizing that their base of voters doesn't really identify with that stuff. They identify more with the culture issues that we found ourselves going back to again and again in America. And sometimes that's about, guns or race politics.
To this same line of thought here, if Biden wins in a big way, if Democrats take the Senate back in more than just a one seat majority, does the GOP have to recalibrate? completely? Do you think that they will shed some of the Trumpism, or do you think that they have, as you just said, recognized this is the path for us?
I don't know. I mean, I think to me, that's one of the most interesting questions that's going to be under debate.
The biggest known unknown, right? What happens after? What do you think happens on day of? What do you think is going to happen on the day of the election? Have most people already voted, or are there going to be lines again on Tuesday?
I think people should be prepared to see lines and to probably in certain places stand in line for a while. And I think, some of that is, yes, certain states have closed polling places, probably with a plan to suppress the votes of people in Democratic areas, particularly minority areas. But also America just doesn't invest in its voting equipment very well. So these machines break, I live in New York City. New York is notorious for having terrible voting equipment and for having long lines. And sometimes those long lines, because of, failures of machines, do disenfranchise people unintentionally. So yes, I think we're going to see long lines. Our line that we've been trying to push at 538 is do not expect to go to bed and know who the president is, and do not expect to wake up the next morning and know who the president is. Think of it as election week or, God forbid, even election month. This is not... do you think that it's likely we won't know on Tuesday? I mean, I know obviously we need to be responsibly prepared to go to bed and not know, but the states that report the fastest are the Floridas and North Carolina, correct? I mean, if Biden wins both of those, is it over? That would be very good for him. I think.
Oh, girl, you are like a lawyer. I'm not going to hold any of this against you later. Don't worry.
I think that, actually, we were talking about this today. I was talking about this with our podcast host, Galen Druk, about what time are we going to record our election night podcast? And my guess is 2 a.m.
You'll just need to go live. Just be ready. Get some caffeine. And
the internet can't handle us live, Clay. It would not be good. I don't know. I mean, to go back to the conversation we were having earlier about state polls versus national polls, Biden's looking really good in the national average, and frankly, he's looking pretty good on the state level in a lot of places. And I think, my biggest hope is that we will see adults in the room from both campaigns.
Right. Well, that's a pie in the sky hope right there.
and that everyone will stick to being responsible about this. And our hope in the media is that there will not be problems, or extraordinary problems, that we will be able to give people, if not a clear answer about who is president, then clear information about what steps are being taken to determine who the president is. Because, some of this stuff could potentially, filter its way into the court system because of the number of mail-in ballots we're seeing. There's certainly a lot of lawyers from both the Democratic and Republican Party who are...
We're talking on this podcast right now about who do we have next week? Do we have someone to recap the election, or do we have attorneys on as our guests to talk about the ensuing legal battles? But I keep going back to 2012 when I had settled in on the night of the election in 2012 for a very, very long night and ended up being like, oh, well, shit, that was fast. I mean, we found out that Obama won re-election because he won Florida pretty quickly. And I told people personally, and I'm about as educated at this as my dog is, so that's none. But I did tell people in June of 2016 that I anticipated Trump would probably win. That's probably because I have spent my entire life in North Carolina and see that we kind of shift with the wind here and typically go to the right. I saw it coming in 2016. I'm looking forward to an early night. And I know that's not what you're supposed to say.
No, but
it's what I feel.
It certainly could be the case. And again, I struggle, with frankly what to say about this publicly because listen,
you got to manage expectations too. Right?
Well, yeah, but also, again, I hope that, let's say the hypothetical Biden wins, I hope that the president would concede in that case. But I also, a thing that I think is happening in a lot of newsrooms, including ours, is talking through the real possibility that we do have a clear factual winner on election night, and let's say that person is Joe Biden, but that the president who has shown us over the course of 4 years that he has the capacity to spread misinformation, that he could do that on election night. Again, I hope that doesn't happen.
You very, very, I think we all should be prepared for it, but a concession is not required by law. So that's what I say. I want to jump in real quick to our quick fire questions. We ask folks to send in questions to our guest every week. Specifically for Clare this week, we had several come in. Actually, Carl from Santa Fe has the same question that I have. He specifically says, 538 has become my oracle. Is that bad? What do you tell people like me? How do you warn them about spending too much time on the 538 website?
Yeah. Well, for health reasons, I think people should get more vitamin D. It's like I struggle with how to communicate this to people because, we want those clicks. But no, listen, I don't think a lot of stuff is going to change in the next week. We're recording this on a Tuesday. Like, I'm not anticipating any craziness happening. So why torture yourself, And
Keep clicking, but not with stress. Take a Xanax and click.
But also, I think it's some of it's, I realize that right now it's a lot of anxiety from people who just want to see this election over with. Like, I think Democrat or Republican, a lot of Americans are just sick of this stuff, right? They want to get the election over with. And so I think, you can use us as, your sort of mathematical predictors. But again, I also think that people should visualize what it would look like for their candidate not to win, because as we, that is a possibility, and that your mind should also be prepared for that eventuality. So
you said something last week on your podcast, I think, which was brilliant, when people were asking about 538's role in this. And I think you said something to the effect of, if you're looking for reassurance that Joe Biden will win, then listen to Pod Save America. But
and I got in trouble for that on Twitter. Listen, I think but actually it's an interesting example, because I think with the rise of Pod Save America, and like I saw today that the Lincoln Project is just signed with like a talent agency, and is maybe going to do the kind of like right centrist version of Pod Save America potentially. Like, those are media organizations, but they are partisan media organizations. We are journalistic, right? That's our game here. We're here to give you facts. We're here to give you measured facts.
But Americans don't want facts unless they agree with what they.
But yeah, and I think that there's an interesting confusion on the left, because a lot of, particularly like, let's say, listeners to the 538 Politics podcast and Pod Save America might well tend to skew college educated and white, and therefore they're probably skewed Democratic liberal, right? And they want some
reassurance,
they want reassurance, and because they listen maybe to these two politics podcasts, they maybe sometimes mush the two together. And my game is like, that's great. You should listen to that. That's totally fine. That's not my job. My job is not to make you,
Good
rah. But
that's why I'm not trying to get you to predict anything here.
But it's but it is an interesting, extremely 2020 conundrum. And I think there's a whole probably interesting reflective podcast to be done with like Nate or whomever about the actual effects that 538 has on people's political psyches.
Well, they get pissed because you don't give them that's sort of what we expect from our news now. We expect it to reinforce what we want it to reinforce. And that's why I like 538, because I know you don't. So I appreciate that. We got a whole bunch of good questions. Okay. I usually only do 3, but I want to try to get to a few more. Kathy from Austin asks, is Joe Biden making Hillary's mistake by not campaigning in the right places? He's not doing Wisconsin and Michigan anymore, is he? He's down in Georgia and Florida and Iowa, correct?
Yeah, I think Biden, it's a different election because of COVID, so he's certainly just been around less. Right. But frankly, he's doing better in those states, and I know that kind of triggers a lot of people's 2016 acid reflux when we talk about Wisconsin and why isn't he campaigning there enough or something. But I do think that
that's not why Hillary lost, so I'm not going to get triggered.
Yeah, I think they feel better about their standing in the state, and I would guess that they have some internal numbers that probably show pretty rosy. This is me totally speaking off the cuff, but showing some things that are maybe rosier internal favorabilities for Biden versus Clinton, and that probably has lots of stuff to do with the fact that he's a sort of predictable older white male moderate politician, and Clinton was the first woman.
Isla from San Francisco asks, does voter registration have an effect on the vote? As I hear GOP have larger registrations than Dems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw this question coming up kind of a week ago when this was being reported out. What I would say to that is there's lots of interest from both parties here, but some of those GOP registration numbers could be a little bit misleading because the Democrats saw a lot of registrations in 2018. And also remember, they had a contested Democratic primary. So there would have been people registering to vote for that.
Right.
So there might be just some Republicans who are kind of coming off the bench and saying, I got to register to vote. So it's interesting. And it certainly indicates the enthusiasm that everyone has for this election. But I wouldn't read too much into it.
Are Dems, to that end, are there any Democrats waiting to vote on Election Day? Or are we expecting that Democrats have voted in early voting and that there's going to be a red surge on Election Day itself?
I think a lot of Democratic constituencies still like to vote in person. The African-American community in particular likes, because of the history of the disenfranchisement of African-American votes in America. Yeah, there's a lot of people who will show up, in person on that day. Also, there's like one of the other things people should be prepared for is like a lot of people show up at 6:50, 10 minutes before the polls close. And the busy people and we have to wait.
The undecideds who took that long to decide.
Exactly. But so, yeah, I still think you see a lot of Democrats voting in person on election day.
Gary from New Haven asks, is Trafalgar a legitimate polling operation?
I don't know what Trafalgar is, so I don't want to speak out of my.
They're the ones who predicted that President Trump would win in Wisconsin and Michigan, and I think that FiveThirtyEight has them ranked has them graded but they tend to skew Republican, right?
I'm seeing I just Googled that. Nate Silver blasts Trafalgar as crazy. So I think that's the official stance.
Gary. There's your answer. Okay, and then the last one, Henry from Nashville asks what all of us want to know. What state should we watch on election night? Which state specifically are you, Claire, going to watch the closest?
I mean, I'm watching Ohio just out of I'm from Ohio and I'm kind of I've written a lot of stories about some of the Obama-Trump voters there. And while Trump is up in Ohio, I think it would be really notable if he did win. So I'm personally keeping an eye on that. But, Florida,
how close is it at the moment?
Let's see. Give me a second.
My little interesting trivia, my campaign, from my congressional campaign, my field director is now running the coordinated campaign for Ohio.
Oh, really?
So I'm rooting for Joe for many reasons right now. But if you're
North Carolina, Ohio connection kind of makes sense. Yep. Currently, Biden has a 42 in 100 chance of winning Ohio. Trump wins in 58 out of 100 scenarios.
So it's not that close. That's. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's not that hard a win for Biden.
No, yeah, and so I think, to me, that would be really interesting. But I think people should kind of keep their eyes on the Floridas and Pennsylvanias of the world.
Well, Pennsylvania is a state where we definitely don't expect to see a result by election night.
Yeah,
right?
I think
because they're not even voting, counting their absentee ballots.
Yeah, but my answer is there's a lot of really interesting states on the map this time around. So I'm going to
be watching whichever state gets to 270. That's what I'm going to be looking for. You hit 270 and I don't care who you are, we'll be good to go. Clare Malone, I honestly could talk to you for another hour. You have got to be the busiest. You and your FiveThirtyEight friends have got to be the busiest people on the planet this week outside of the campaigns themselves. So thank you for what you're doing to help educate us all on the longest week in American history.
Of course. This was a delight, Clay. Thank you for the wonderful conversation.
I appreciate it. We will hopefully come back and talk to us when there's less stress in all of our lives. So if you like the podcast, please rate it, subscribe to it, like it, whatever you're supposed to do on podcasts, all the buttons on Apple and Spotify. I don't know how that stuff works. I'm too old, but I'm glad you're listening. And we'll be back next week with our first post-election episode of How the Heck Are We Going to Get Along? Thank you again, Claire. This was seriously, I could keep going forever, but they like an hour. So,
oh my gosh, you should work for 538. I'm like kind of not kidding.
I just run my mouth, and I'm stupid enough to ask a lot of questions.
No. Hey, are you ever going to run for office again? Is this like in this?
I don't know. Not in this climate. I sure as hell am not.
Yeah,
we'll see. I'm not saying no to it, but I'm not looking for anything right now. I mean, I think I'm not willing to be partisan enough. I think I'd have a harder time getting through a primary these days than I would a general, just because while I am very progressive on policy, I just don't have the energy or the time to scream bloody murder about every time Trump goes golfing. I mean, you know what? Yeah. Let him go golfing more. The more he's out of the office, the more happier I am.
Go run for like city councilor or something. I have one of my brothers is a city councilor in my
That's
hometown.
really where people get stuff done, right?
It is completely where they get stuff done. Yeah. And it's like, I think he's sort of like, should I run for state senate? And it's kind of like, don't.
I mean, that's state senate and legislature is really the places where, and people don't quite, and actually maybe we'll have you back at some point to talk about that media conglomeration thing, because that is something that I don't think people realize. I mean, we really are 50 different countries.
Yeah.
Who happen to be in a European Union-like union as the United States, right? But because the media, because we're only watching our, Rachel Maddow's and Chris Cuomo's and Sean Hannity's every night, we forget that really the stuff that's affecting your life is happening in your state. It's just you don't have a nighttime opinion host talking about your state legislature.
Right.
So come back sometime when we can make that a topic, because I would
love to.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I would love to. This is really
fun. Let's hope the world's still turning come November 30th. So thanks so much again, Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
13 days of Halloween. A remote hotel, the most unusual guests, a tour guide that can't be trusted. And the newest arrival is you.
Why are you here again?
They sound like someone you trust.
I know you can hear me.
Starring Keegan-Michael Key as the caretaker.
Please make yourself at home. After all, this is it.
One story each night, starting October 19th and ending on Halloween. From iHeartRadio and Blumhouse Television, listen to Aaron Mahnke's 13 Days of Halloween on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
After you listen to today's podcast, here's one to add to your playlist. I'm Christian O'Connell, and I've had this thought for a while. What if you took the world's funniest and most interesting people...
Hello, I'm Ricky Gervais.
Celeste Barber. Some people call me Beyonce.
I'm Russell Brand.
And asked them to share the stories behind their 3 most treasured items.
No doubt about it, the guitar. I think I know the same chords now as I did when I was 14.
From iHeartRadio, this is The Stuff of Legends. Add it to your playlist for free. Just search for Stuff of Legends in your podcast app.